Welcome to another Ridercast. Join me as I journey through the decades. I'm going to be talking about, this is my continuing effort to sample all the Hesei-era Kamen Riders, now that the Heisei era has ended and the Reiwa era is upon us. This time I'm going to be talking about Kamen Rider Decade, or Decado. First of all, I'll be talking about the meta information about Kamen Rider Decade or Decade. I'm going to say Decade, although I'll probably switch back and forth. So as the wind carries me. So here's the meta information. Kamen Rider Decade had only 31 episodes. There were 4 movies and 1 special that I'm unfamiliar with. The first episode it ran from January 25th, 2009 to August 30th, 2009. So, Decade represents a shift. Well, anyway, I'm not supposed to be getting into the meta information necessarily, but it does represent a shift in how Kamen Rider was done, how it aired. But definitely in watching it, you can see that the way that the writers executed is different from previous writers, and it'll really carry through, with Double and the others. But anyway, the first episode was written by Sho Aikawa, and Ryuta Tasaki was the director, and that episode was called Rider War. And the second episode is called The World of Kuuga, and Sho Aikawa wrote this, and Ryuta Tasaki directed it once again. The intro song is Journey Through the Decade, and I happen to know off the top of my head that it's sung by Gact. And the lyrics are by Shoko Fujibayashi. Composition is Ryo of Death Spiral, who I'm unfamiliar with. Arrangement was apparently Kotaro. A lot of different people depending on who, where it was specifically released. But there's a Kotaro Nakagawa and then Ryo, and then it goes on to different versions. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting there. Let me see about the rest of the information I want to share with you. I was looking through the suit actors and found something interesting. Seiji Takawa plays Kamen Rider Decade. But Kamen Rider Kuuga is portrayed by both Kenji Tominaga and Norihito Ito, which kind of seems surprising to me. But hey, maybe they had different times or different reasons for him to be played by different people. I don't know. But I think that's it for the meta information. I'm going to go ahead and roll on forward into talking about the premise of Kamen Rider Decade. So the premise of Decade is that Tsukasa Kayoda's world is going to be destroyed, and there are 9 other worlds besides his that each belongs to a Kamen Rider or a former rider, and he is to go through these worlds and do something. Now, he doesn't know what he's supposed to do. We don't know what he's supposed to do. At the end of this episode 2, Kuuga decides that he has to fight him because he's some sort of devil who will destroy the riders. And actually, they call out that he will destroy the other riders. Interestingly enough, the guy who explains that to him is portrayed by Seto Koji, who played none other than Kamen Rider Kiba, the previous Kamen Rider from the show. And he tells Tsukasa that he and his allies will preserve his world on the brink of destruction and save it for a while longer while he travels to the other worlds and does whatever he needs to do to save them. But he also refers to Tsukasa as having forgotten something, and he doesn't really implore him to remember, but he asks him if he's remembered yet, and there's a whole big mystery behind it. But basically, he finds himself injected into the worlds of other writers, and he has a little adventure in them. And honestly, I should have probably watched episode 3, but my shtick here is that I'm just watching the first 2 episodes. But I watched to the end because it didn't feel like it was concluded, and sure enough, I should have, the story concludes in episode 3, at least for this little section of the show. So, my mistake, too bad. It's kind of interesting, but still, based off the first 2 episodes, I feel like I'm qualified to talk about, what happened, what I saw with my own eyes. Okay, so moving on over to the cast, we have Natsumi, who is a friend and kind of caretaker to Tsukasa, and she and her grandfather live and work at this Hikari studio, and she kind of takes responsibility for the guy, but also pushes back against all his BS. I don't know, Tsukasa is kind of an interesting guy. He feels very out of place in the world, and he just kind of stumbled into their studio one day and has started living a life with them, wants to be a photographer to photograph everything because he's so terrible at it, but he feels like he's being rejected by the world because he none of his pictures come out properly, which is interesting. And the dynamic between them is a lot of fun. There's she obviously cares for him, but there's like a, I don't know, brother sister kind of very familial relationship between them, and he's not an idiot, but he's kind of I don't know, he's aloof and he just kind of does his own thing, and she pushes back on him, like I said earlier, about that a lot, and like she kind of wants to try to force him to be to act right and to not cause any harm to people, and so she kind of keeps him in check, and he kind of just goes off in these wacky, weird directions and does kind of some unexpected things. So that's an interesting dynamic. But aside them, we have an Onodera Yosuke, not a Godai Yosuke, as excuse me, who becomes Kamen Rider Kuuga, and along with him, he has his very own special somebody who is a detective. Apparently, she's a blend of Ichigo and Sakurako from the original Kuuga. Detective Yashiro. So she reads as older. Yusuke reads as younger. He seems to kind of be chasing her affection or something. They kind of have a weird relationship. It's not too dissimilar from what's going on between Tsukasa and Natsumi, and you got to see them kind of pair off, and Natsumi and Yusuke had a conversation, and it was interesting because as I was watching, I thought like, wow, this is actually kind of deep for a kid show, and that's good. That like there's subtext there that the characters witness while they're interacting with each other, and then Natsumi brings it up to him, and then he kind of pushes it back at her, which is a lot of fun. So I like the interaction with the cast. You don't get to see too much from her grandpa yet. Probably if I watched the third episode, I would have had enough to say about him, but I'm going to leave him out and just move on from talking about the cast. But I did like how everybody worked together, and there's even like an instant dislike of Yusuke, or from Yusuke towards, I was going to say Decade, towards Tsukasa, and I understand it. He comes off as a jerk. I guess I'll just use the tame version of it, D-bag. He does that very well. So good job on Masahiro Inoue. But gosh, it reads, I don't know. He's got a weird magnetism and charm because like he should be so dislikable, but he's kind of not. So, or you like him because he is dislikable. I don't know. The design work of Decade is interesting because there isn't too much design work other than Decade himself. We've got his gear here. We can see it like in a ruined form, and then in this kind of cleaned up form when he puts it on, it kind of breaks the seal and everything, and he gets to put it back together. His belt has the symbols of the other 9 riders on it, and then it's around the middle of his. And he's got this camera, and from the OP and stuff, like it almost feels like the middle of that is the aperture. But then again, he's like scanning cards, or he's pulling these cards out of this like card holder thing that he has on his hip on his left side, and he pulls the card out from there. He inserts it into the belt. The belt kind of opens up, and then he closes it down over that lens area. Anyway, the design of his belt is interesting. It's very sleek. It's very reductive and minimalistic, and it feels like it blends well with pretty much any design other than the fact that it's a little techy. But it feels kind of like Kamen Rider Black's belt. It feels kind of like Kuuga's belt with those lights on it. It feels kind of like Deno's belt, or buckle, as it's called in the episode, or the translation I got, and which I like. I like buckle. That's cool. But then like his card holder thing turns into a sword, and it's got this diagonal slash through it, just like the X that he has on him, representing, I'm assuming, the number 10. And it's a very cool, very fun design. Oh, and then his sword book thing turns into a gun, too. It compresses down into a gun, which is fun. Another thing, there's a really slick way. The way that they travel through the worlds is that the grandfather pulls down these like backdrops for photography, and it changes to look like the world that they are currently inhabiting, or that he's going through. And the introduction to that from the end of episode 2 was great. They just did a really good job. It's sleek, it's elegant, and simple, and I don't know. I guess it makes sense. And I think I remember in Kuuga, spoilers for Kuuga, there's a door that takes you places, and like you never see a CGI effect or anything on the other side of it. Just like characters like slowly approach the door and they go through the door. Maybe there's a flashlight or something, and then boom, they're through it, and then they're into this other world. So that's pretty neat. I like the boldness of him having a pink suit, and the pink, white, and black just all really blend well together. Like it's a weird design. And there's probably a lot more to say about it. I mean, if I were doing a weekly show on this, there'd be a lot more to say. But gosh, it's really bold, it's striking. It flows well. It's a really competently done, and I like it. I really like what they did. It's gosh, so interesting, and there's probably a lot more to say about it. But I'm going to go ahead and stop right there because I don't feel like I'm articulating it all very well. But yeah, man, the Decade suit, very cool. So my overall impressions of Decade are good. I'm liking what I'm seeing. It's a very interesting seeming show, and based on these 2 episodes, I definitely at least want to watch the third one to see how it resolves, because there's a conflict brewing between Yusuke or Kuuga and Decade. So I want to see what that's all about and really get a feel of who the character is. But so far, it's interesting. It seems it's a really cool concept that he can become all these other riders and use their powers and stuff. But the whole mystery about who he is, and what happened to his memories and why his world's being destroyed and all that stuff. It's intriguing, engaging, and I liked it fair. I wouldn't say at this point I love it like like some other shows, but really interesting, and I wouldn't mind watching it and finding out exactly everything that happens. And it's only a 31 episode show, so that's not too daunting. But it is something I kind of feel like I do want to watch a lot of the other writers first, which is kind of why I'm doing this, not to watch Decade, but just to get a feel for everybody, and then go through a show like this or Zio where it touches on all these other writers in so many different ways. So that's the end of what I have to say for Kamen Rider Decade for this episode of Another Rider Cast. So you can go ahead and check out more of my work on mjmunoz.com. Please remember to subscribe and ring the notification bells if you really like what I'm doing, so you can get more of it every time I release something new. Also, liking and sharing this would be a huge help to me. I'd really appreciate that. You can also check out the other shows I've done. I've got other episodes of Another Rider Cast. There's a playlist you can see, and there's also a playlist for MJ Loves Toku, which is another thing I'm doing where I kind of randomly jump around and talk about different tokusatsu as it pleases me. If you're really, really enjoying what I'm doing and want to throw some support my way, you can visit coffee.com/mjmunoz to do that, and I would really appreciate that. That's pretty much all I have to say, though. Thank you for joining me here. Don't forget, you can check the link in the description if you're looking at this on YouTube for the audio-only version of it. And any other relevant links will be on mjmunoz.com. You can just search through the podcasts and find Another Rider Cast there. Thank you for sharing your time with me. Until next time, be well.